Okay, so what you're looking at here is a rocket oven. I'll be the first to admit that it's not all that pretty at the moment, but when spring rolls around and we can get back to doing some cob work, we'll fix that. This project actually began its life as an earth oven. I bought Kiko Denzer's book, Build Your Own Earth Oven, and built one exactly on the same spot that this one is sitting now. Overall, we were very, very satisfied with the earth oven's function in terms of cooking food. It held its heat for a very long time. It cooked beautifully. I mean, we were so very happy with the function of the oven. But the time it took to heat it up was about 4 hours, and it was 4 hours of pretty much pain because it was incredibly smoky, it was finicky, and required constant care and feeding. Over several weeks of trying to use the oven that way, it got to be just laborious and unpleasant. And so we decided to do something different. I had learned a little bit about rocket stoves by way of information a friend passed on to me about rocket mass heaters. So to give you a little basic information about how a rocket stove works, I've drawn a little diagram here. And as you can see, it's basically in a J shape. The fuel enters on the left side there, which is the feed tube. The initial fire happens at the very bottom of the feed tube. That fire then travels horizontally, and then it goes up the heat riser, which is shown on the right-hand side. Because the heat riser is taller than the feed tube, it has an advantage, and as it begins to heat, it draws the fire even more powerfully as it gets hotter and hotter. In that feed tube also, the smoke is reburned, so by the time it gets to the top of the heat riser, the smoke is basically gone, and everything coming out of there is essentially just heat. So the construction of a basic rocket stove is pretty simple, and most people that I've seen use fire bricks that you pick up at masonry supply stores. And you basically make yourself a box with an open top, and then you divide the top into two parts. One part is going to be your feed, and one part is going to be the place where you locate your heat riser. For the heat riser to work really well, it really should be insulated. I had made mine out of 8-inch galvanized flue pipe, so I decided to create a kind of a form around it to fill with an insulative layer. I folded up a sheet of Wonderboard into 3 sections and backed it up with a stack of cinder blocks to create a space in between the galvanized flue pipe and the wall of those things. I filled the space in between with a mix of clay slip and vermiculite. Once I had the basic rocket stove built, I built a stone foundation to support the weight of the oven. One of the great things about a regular earth oven in which the fire burns inside the body of the oven is that you really get a tremendous advantage of the radiant heat coming off of the fire. That really does a great job of heating the interior mass of stone that comprises the body of the earth oven itself. Looking around online, I've seen a couple of examples of rocket stoves being integrated into ovens. In those cases, the food is actually being cooked in the flue gas from the rocket stove. So essentially the food sits in the oven, the hot gas enters the oven, and then it exits, but on its way by it's actually cooking the food. This seems to me to be just about exactly what happens in my gas oven in my kitchen. In my case, I wanted to actually use the flue gas to heat the mass of the oven rather than to just simply cook in the flue gas. I think the big difference between using the flue gas of a rocket stove and the natural gas that burns in my kitchen oven is that there's the potential always that you may get incomplete combustion with the rocket stove. And in the event that that happens, you're going to get smoke into the body of the oven. My concern is that I would have a plate of cookies or brownies or a pie or something of that nature, and I would end up getting a smoky taste to it. So I'm really not in favor of that method. So my goal is just to simply use the flue gas to heat the masonry of the oven, then shut down that rocket stove fire, and allow the radiant heat from the masonry of the oven to cook the food. In order to do this effectively with the flue gas, my sense is that I want to keep that in the body of the oven as long as I can. One of my strategies for doing this is to create essentially a false floor in my oven. After building a foundation for my oven, I floated a mix of sand and clay to the top of the heat riser. Then I cut some bricks into small chunks using a diamond blade on my skill saw. I use these little blocks as standoffs to support the bricks that will actually be the oven floor. In this way, the flue gas hits the bottom of the oven floor and begins heating the bricks. Next, it's forced back to the back of the oven where I've left a couple of blocks missing, and then it comes up to the back of the oven, over the ceiling, and then out the top of the door. To look at that from a different perspective, here's a little video footage. So this is the oven opening, and I'm just going to pull out a brick here to show you that space below. You can see the little blocks are supporting the bricks, and I'll just pull one more out here if I can get it, and you'll see the top of the heat riser in a moment. There it is. So that's the heat riser. That's coming up and hitting those bricks, and the first thing it does then, of course, is heating them. Now, the gas has nowhere to go except to the back of the oven at this point, because the only place I've left a void is way at the back there. I don't know if you can quite see it, but way at the back there, there's a space where I've left a few bricks out, and the gas comes, hits the bottom of the floor, rushes to the back opening there, comes up the back wall of the oven, along the roof of the oven to escape out the top of the doorway. This is my way of trying to capture as much heat as possible in the process. So lighting is pretty easy. I always make sure that I have a little bundle of kindling on hand and a few rolled up bits of newspaper and a pack of matches. I just drop the newspaper balls into the burn chamber, light them on fire, and as soon as the heat from those little bits of newspaper find their way into the heat riser, it creates a draw, and it begins pulling all the smoke and all the flame in the direction of the heat riser. Then I just drop my kindling on top of the burning paper, and we're off and running. It's really that simple. One of the things I've noticed about my own behavior with this is that I'm still training myself to slow down. I have a tendency to overload the burn chamber, and that seems to be when things begin to smoke. You can see a little bit of folded metal there in the opening to the feed tube. That's referred to as a Peter channel on the blogs at Permies.com, and it's meant to provide a guaranteed flow of heated air to the fire. I understand you can do some kind of tweaking and tuning of that. I haven't gotten that far yet, but I certainly do appreciate the fact that it guarantees me that no matter how much wood I happen to put into the firebox, there will be at least that little, about a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch gap. At least that much space will allow fresh air into the fire itself. I'd like to mention a couple of cautionary things here. In my process, I made the mistake of trying to build the oven door after I'd built the oven, and then kind of retrofitting the shape into the body of the oven. That was, in retrospect, clearly a real waste of time. If I had built the oven door first, put it in place, and then built the oven directly to fit it, everything would have, all the clay and stuff would have shrunk together, and I would have gotten a wonderful fit. I've got an okay fit with my door, but it's not great, so I wish I'd done it the other way. Another cautionary note I'd like to add is that I always found that I underestimated my materials. In my experience, you got to add 10-15% more than whatever you can possibly imagine you need. It's true that you can always come back in and patch, but things are never stronger and more well integrated than when they're done all at one time. So that's really all the information I can put into this little 10-minute video. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to hear from you and do my best to respond to you. I just want to also thank all of you out there who've been putting information on the internet, because I couldn't possibly have done this project without all of the dozens and dozens of videos and maybe even hundreds of blog postings I've read over the past several months. So thanks to all of you for that.